Hi guys, welcome back to 100 Days Machine Learning Crash Course. Today we want to learn how to set up the CUDA Tensorflow Keras and install them, and at the end how to use them. Okay, so we now have learned lots of things about deep learning and neural networks, and so we need a framework to work with in Python to implement our neural networks. For example, in machine learning, for machine learning algorithms like SVM or K-means clustering and other things like that, we used scikit-learn as a framework to implement our machine learning algorithms easily. So now for neural networks, and especially for convolutional neural networks, we have a really good framework which is named Keras, and in fact implementing neural networks with Keras is really easy, and training them. So we want to know how to install Keras. Okay, so the Keras itself is a high-level API framework for implementing neural networks, and in fact the Keras itself could use different backends to train the neural networks. For example, we will learn about Tensorflow, which is the most used backend for Keras, but it could also support Theano, CNTK, and some other backends. So for installing Keras, we should install Tensorflow. Okay, so the first step is to install Tensorflow and then Keras. So for you who wants to train the networks on GPU and train the networks much more faster than CPU, we should install Tensorflow on GPU. Okay, so the Tensorflow itself has two different versions. One of them is for CPU and another is for GPU. It's called Tensorflow GPU. And to install the Tensorflow for GPU, before that we should install CUDA, because CUDA is the interface that Tensorflow used to use the your graphic card to train the models. So Tensorflow, if you install Tensorflow GPU, it uses CUDA, and the Keras uses Tensorflow to train the network. Okay, if you use Keras, but also if you could also use the Tensorflow itself to implement the networks, but we will see that writing the neural networks with Keras is much more easy than Tensorflow. It is much more handy. Okay, so but for those who wants to just have some ideas that how a neural network could train, or how the neural network works, and this kind of stuff, they could install Tensorflow on CPU, okay, and then install Keras. So this is for who wants to install Tensorflow CPU and Keras. To install Tensorflow, you just need to install that with pip. So if you use Python 2, you could have pip. If you use Python 3, you should put a 3 in here. Okay, so sudo pip install tensorflow. Okay, in this case, if you hit the enter, the tensorflow will be installed for you. And after that, to install Keras, you just install it. Okay, so this is for using TensorFlow CPU. And if you go to Python, when you type import Keras, it should work well, and it types using TensorFlow backend, as you could see. And also you could import TensorFlow to work with. Okay, so after installation, you could test that whether you install the packages successfully or not by just importing them in Python to check it. Okay, but for those who wants to install TensorFlow GPU, there are some points that are important. The first point is that you should always be aware of which version that you install for TensorFlow GPU and CUDA, because sometimes the versions, there are some incompatibilities between the newer version of CUDAs and some version of TensorFlow. So, and you will get some error when you want to import the TensorFlow in Python. So you should be aware of matching the versions in TensorFlow GPU and CUDA. For example, I installed the CUDA. In here, you could see the version of CUDA is 9.1, and the version of my TensorFlow GPU is, let's find it in here, it is 1.12. Okay, so if you want to, you could actually install the same versions that I did to not having any problem. So how to install CUDA? To install CUDA, you should go to NVIDIA site, and so we should go to NVIDIA website and download the CUDA. So CUDA download. Okay, and in here you could see 10.1 version, but maybe there are some conflicts between this version and the version of TensorFlow. So you could try that, or you could download the 9.0 or 9.1 version. So if you have Linux, click on Linux, and if you have Ubuntu like me, so you click on Ubuntu, and then you it's better to download the Debian file in here, or the deb file. So you could click on this to download the CUDA, and as you could see here, you could actually, after downloading, you just need to enter these commands to install the CUDA. Okay, after installation the CUDA, we have another library that you should install to work with CUDA. It's called CuDNN, and it is for deep learning neural networks. It is a library that allows the graphic card to use fast computations for speeding up the training process. So also you should note to the version that you want to download for CuDNN, because some version of CuDNNs are not compatible with CUDA versions, and so all of these things should be compatible. So you could download that from NVIDIA website. Okay. After downloading, so you should join to the website and then log in, and you could download that there. Okay. After downloading the CuDNN, you could install CuDNN by following this link, which is a very great link to, and in here also you could see about also TensorFlow and Keras themselves. But if you want to just know about CuDNN, you just follow these instructions from here. Okay, you just need to copy. After downloading, you should copy them into these passes, okay, with these two commands. So it is pretty easy to install also CuDNN. After that, in here you just type in your terminal, you install TensorFlow GPU. Before that, you could check whether the CUDA is installed or not. So to check, you could write nvcc version to check that the CUDA whether is installed or not. And before installing the CUDA, update your NVIDIA graphic card. So install the graphic driver for your graphic card, and you could check that whether you have you installed the graphic card driver or not with NVIDIA's MI in here. Okay, so I have the driver version in here. So after the installation of graphic driver, I will install CUDA and then CuDNN, and now TensorFlow GPU. Okay, TensorFlow GPU, and you could specify the version if you want to install the same version as me. You could write this command or equal to specify the version that you want to install, because there are also other versions. If I hit the enter, you could see that there are lots of newer versions. So if you have a newer graphic card and install the latest version of CUDA, maybe you could install the latest version of TensorFlow, but I don't know whether the Keras supports these versions or not, so you should be aware of that. But myself, I installed the TensorFlow GPU 1.12.0. okay, so you could install that. After installing that, you should install Keras, and the version that I installed is let me to find that in here, 2.2.4. okay, so you could install the Keras version 2.2.4 and install the Keras. And for Keras, we don't have GPU or CPU specifications for Keras, because Keras just work with TensorFlow. So if your TensorFlow is installed for CPU, the Keras use the TensorFlow from CPU, and if it is installed for GPU, the Keras use TensorFlow GPU. Okay, so after this installation, you could check your whole installation with importing Keras and importing TensorFlow. To check that whether it works fine or not. Okay, and so now you know how to install Keras, TensorFlow, CUDA, and CuDNN. And you could see Keras is open source GitHub project. You could see the information about Keras in here. And for see the documentation of Keras, Keras has a very nice website to how to use different things in Keras. For example, let's say we want to use convolutional layers. You could go there, and we want to use 2D convolutions in Keras. You could see that how to use them and what parameters you could use to create your neural network. We will talk about some implementations later. Practically now I want just to show you how to use the documentation, or for example for pooling layers. You could see in here we have max pooling layer, we have average pooling, and so on and so forth. And as you could see here, you could add batch normalization layer, and so it is a very well documented framework. And to check, to get the final check, you could see and implement an example of convolutional neural networks, which in the website of Keras, to just copy and paste it and train the neural network that you want to check whether the Keras is installed correctly or not. Okay, so let me go to desktop, and in here I opened the Jupyter notebook, and then create a Python file and paste this code. Okay, if you run that, in here you could see using Tensorflow backend, and now it's downloading for the first time. It downloads the MNIST dataset, and now, well done, you could see that it is training your neural network. Okay, and in here we have accuracy. We will talk about this, how you could print accuracy or other metrics later, so don't worry about them. Just this is an example of checking your installation and everything is gone well. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this code. So as you could see here, the Keras itself has MNIST dataset, so we imported them, and we have a sequential model because we just have our model is basically something like this. We have some layers. Okay, so this is a sequential model. Later maybe you want to create a model which is something like this. So this is not a sequential model, and we use API models to create this kind of models in Keras. But for now the sequential model is fine. Let me stop that because it runs on GPU. It makes my machine a little slow. Okay, I stopped that. Okay, and for creating the neural network, we import dense layer or fully connected layers, the dropout layer, which we talked about it, and the flatten layer, which is basically just make the 2D activation maps a vector. Okay, and also import a convolution layer and max pooling layer. Now we define batch size, number of classes, which is number of digits, because the dataset is MNIST, so we want to recognize different digits from 0 to 9, so we have 10 classes. And we define the image dimension. Let's go to and in here we just done a quick normalization, which we divided the image by 255 because the maximum value of the image is 255 because the image is unsigned int, 8-bit unsigned integer. So by dividing it by 255, then it is kind of normalization to normalize the image between 0 and 1. In here you could see how to create a model. So we add some convolutional layers and specify the activation functions in here, and we use max pooling, dropout, and after flattening we could use the dense layers, and at last we need number of classes with softmax activation function. Okay, and after that we could compile the model. We use the categorical cross entropy to train our neural networks, and for the optimizer we use the ADA delta. You could use ADAM in here, or RMS prop also, or stochastic gradient descent, and you could pass the learning rate in here. We will see these later more accurately. And for the metrics you could use accuracy or MSE or MAE or some other metrics. After that you should call the model fit, the fit method, which you pass your training data and the batch size and number of epochs that you want to train your neural network, and the validation data. And verbose is actually the when you set it equal to 1, then in the output you have the training procedure outputs the accuracy, the loss functions in each epoch in the training. But if you set that to 0, you just have less output for printing. Okay, and you could use the evaluate to get a score of your model, and yeah, that's it. So now you know how to this is just an introduction. I don't expect that with just this introduction to Keras you now be able to code in Keras, because we talk about it later. But this session was about installing Keras and Tensorflow and CUDA. So I hope that you know how to install those packages and test them. Okay, see you in the next session, and I hope that you enjoyed from this session. Bye.